Greetings, people. This is the Mexican American channel. You are welcome to join us. Hit the like button to support the channel and subscribe if you haven't subscribed yet.
My name is Miguel Levario. I'm an associate professor of history at Texas Tech University and author of Militarizing the Border When Mexicans Became the Enemy. Between 1944 and 1954, when Operation Wetback went into effect, it was known by some scholars and by the INS as the decade of the wetback. The idea that our borders are being invaded by unauthorized immigrants from Mexico, especially. You know, we also have the dawn of the Cold War. The United States was very much aware or felt that its borders were quite porous, needed to be secure to a degree because of the threat of a nuclear attack. I believe it was the FBI who would give out public service announcements on radios telling people to be vigilant of an unassuming migrant crossing the river in a ragtag suit, in a ragtag suitcase, that don't believe that they're not threatening, that they could actually fit an atomic bomb and threaten our livelihood. And these are public service announcements that they would use. So this idea of vigilance, national security, were definitely on the radar and definitely in the public mindset in the early years of the Cold War. And immigration kind of fell in through that. Border Patrol had started to become more and more formal. They started to become more aggressive in their tactics, you know, setting up roadblocks, doing raids. What we have here is an aggressive and sort of paramilitary approach into deportation and mass deportation, and of course the use of propaganda to address the issue of unauthorized Mexican workers in the United States. Because the Border Patrol agency was so small, I mean, they're using local law enforcement. So while they're out there trying to look for undocumented immigrants, what aren't they doing? Their own basic responsibilities of keeping neighborhoods safe, addressing burglaries, murders, whatever it could be. The Operation Wetback was terminated in large part because of cost, in large part because of it just became too taxing on local resources. And what we also found out is that regardless of how far you sent them into the interior, within days, sometimes weeks, we're right back in there. It wasn't as successful as the Border Patrol made it out to be, but they had to save face, as it is. And we understand with politics, they didn't solve the issue, obviously, because we've revisited that issue in every decade since the 1920s. Today, our politicians, which I think incorrectly, but our politicians don't separate immigration with national security or even drug smuggling or any kind of smuggling of illicit goods. They kind of lump them all together as if they're all the same thing, which is grossly inaccurate.
Operation Wetback was an immigration law enforcement initiative by the administration of President Dwight D. Eisenhower. It was created by Joseph May Swing, a retired United States Army Lieutenant General and head of the United States Immigration and Naturalization Service. The program was implemented in June 1954 by U.S. Attorney General Herbert Brownell. The short-lived operation used military-style tactics to remove Mexican immigrants from the United States. Although aimed at undocumented Mexican immigrants, some American citizens and legal Mexican immigrants were also deported. The presidency of Dwight D. Eisenhower saw two significant initiatives affecting U.S. immigration and immigrants. In 1953, Eisenhower signed the Refugee Relief Act of 1953, welcoming 214,000 more European immigrants to the U.S. than were allowed under the current system of visa quotas. The 1953 Act was, in many ways, a continuation of the 1948 Displaced Persons Act, which had expired in 1952. The operation, which lasted several months, went forward with at least the tacit approval of the Mexican government, labor groups, and Mexican Americans worried that uncontrolled immigration made the lives of legal immigrants more difficult. The raids disrupted agricultural work in the affected areas, and several Mexicans died due to heat stroke while in the custody of U.S. immigration officials. The operation targeted Mexican immigrants and Mexican Americans in California and Arizona. Attorney General Brownell promoted the crackdown based on his assertion that the Mexican wetback problem was becoming increasingly serious because Mexican immigrants were displacing domestic workers, affecting work conditions, spreading disease, and contributing to crime rates. Millions of Mexicans had legally entered the country through joint immigration programs in the first half of the 20th century. These programs became a contentious issue in Mexico-United States relations, even though they originated at the request by the Mexican government to stop the illegal entry of Mexican laborers into the United States. Law enforcement utilized aggressive militarized methods to locate and deport individuals, often causing significant panic and disruption in Mexican-American communities. Trains were heavily used to transport undocumented immigrants and legal Mexican Americans during the mass deportation campaign, along with boats, buses, and planes to transport individuals from border towns to cities deep within the Mexican interior. In Chicago, 3 planes a week were filled with immigrants and flown to Mexico. The U.S. Border Patrol packed Mexican immigrants into trucks when transporting them to the border for deportation during Operation Wetback. One of the biggest problems caused by the program for the deportees was sending them to unfamiliar parts of Mexico, where they struggled to find their way home or to continue to support their families. More than 25% of apprehended Mexicans were returned to Veracruz on cargo ships, while others were transported by land to southern cities in Mexico. Those apprehended were often deported without receiving the opportunity to recover their property in the United States or to contact their families prior to deportation. Deportees often were stranded without any food or employment when they were released in Mexico. Operation Wetback was the culmination of more than a decade of intensifying immigration enforcement. Immigration enforcement actions, removals, and returns rose rapidly from a low of 12,000 in 1942 to 727,000 in 1952, the final year of the Truman administration. Enforcement actions continued to rise under Eisenhower until reaching a peak of 1.1 million in 1954, the year of Operation Wetback. Border agents' tactics included descending on Mexican-American neighborhoods, demanding identification from Mexican-looking citizens on the street, invading private homes in the middle of the night, and raiding Mexican businesses. Without a hearing or oversight, agents often seized and deported people who were lawfully in the country. By the end of these crusades in California, Arizona, and Texas, as many as 200,000 Mexican immigrants had returned to Mexico, including many who were not undocumented and some who were U.S. citizens. Some immigrants left on their own in the face of the large-scale harassment, but many were taken under Border Patrol escort. The mandatory deportations were done at the deportees' expense and cost some people all the money they had earned while working in the U.S. Extensive media coverage that often exaggerated the strength of the Border Patrol, as well as targeted displays of strength, gave the impression of a greater force. In many regions, this strategy convinced thousands who had entered the U.S. illegally to repatriate voluntarily. This is ethnic cleansing, American style. People, do you understand white supremacy has tried many times to get rid of us? This ain't the first time. Just a few years during the 1930s, there was Mexican repatriation. Same tactics, and they want to tell us to lift ourselves by the bootstraps. White supremacy believes in injustice. White supremacy believes in unfairness. White supremacy believes in cheating. White supremacy believes in stealing. And this concludes for tonight's broadcast. Until next time, family. And always remember, if you know your history, then you would know where you're coming from.